Welcome to Sporting News AFL Trade Preview. The trade period is coming up, and it's going to be a big 9 days. And with me to talk about it all is Bryn Wakefield. How you going, Bryn?
Yeah, great, Kieran. How are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. Let's get straight into it, and let's talk about Clayton Oliver. Now, it's actually just dropped that Clayton Oliver looks like he's going to be staying at Melbourne. It's been a whirlwind saga. I mean, it was such a surprise that he was even possibly up for trade, or that he even wanted to leave Melbourne. We'll still talk about Oliver and which clubs were interested. Adelaide, Essendon, Geelong, St Kilda and Sydney have been mentioned. First of all, how do you see what's happened with Melbourne and Oliver? And what do you think he's worth in terms of picks-wise?
Yeah, it's an incredibly interesting situation, Kieran. So I think it's caught the eye of a lot of people. Just a player who's been probably almost the best player in the AFL the last few seasons. Probably not this season, but he's fantastic around the ground and inside. So he's a player pretty much every club would want, and Adelaide and Essendon were very, very keen, particularly Adelaide. And I don't know what would have gotten it done. Probably at least 2 first rounders, and Shane McAdam would have been thrown in there, and who knows what else. So it's a pretty interesting saga and an interesting way to start off the trade period. Not even before the trade period. So yeah.
Yeah, Oliver actually had 2 pretty good finals. He actually averaged 30 disposals, had 19 clearances, and I think 10 tackles across the 2 weeks. So he actually was pretty solid. I mean, it's a real crazy situation. You would think that 2 firsts would be the bare minimum to get it done. And then obviously you're right, McAdam, certain other players could be thrown in, other pick swaps. You'd also think that Melbourne would have only done the trade if pick 1 was involved as well, to kind of get Harley Reid as the replacement in. You're giving away one of the best players in the competition for a player that could possibly be one of the best players in the competition, I guess. So it's an interesting saga. What do you think it would have done to their midfield kind of currently? Because we obviously know they've got Petrarca and Viney, but there's question marks over Angus Brayshaw. Do you think that it really would have set Melbourne back in their quest for a premiership?
Well, I mean, he was part of that premiership trio in that midfield. So with Petrarca and Viney, and we saw a look at Melbourne without Oliver this season, and they were pretty good. They were strong still, and Petrarca probably took up the slack there, and Viney, I think he had 24 Brownlow votes. So it's still a gun midfield either way. But I think, yeah, like you said, if you're missing Angus Brayshaw, we don't know what's going on with him, then it would have been a big loss to that midfield mix.
You made a good point. Yeah, Melbourne are actually 7-3 without Oliver this season. There's also James Jordan's going to Sydney, and there's rumours about James Harm. So yeah, interesting times at Melbourne. Their midfield's going through a bit of a shake-up. Oliver looks like he's going to stay, but that situation is very fluid. Moving on to probably the other biggest player that's kind of been bandied around during trade week, it's Bailey Smith. Now, this saga kind of started about 2-3 months ago. He was linked to Geelong, and then it was reported that he wanted more midfield time and would consider leaving the Bulldogs if he didn't get more midfield time. That has since been refuted. Hawthorn has been mentioned as a potential destination, with pick 3, their first pick, the one being offered up. Do you think that that's good value for Bailey Smith, and how do you see what's going on?
Yeah, I think that's probably the right price for Bailey Smith. He's a pretty strong player, and almost like Oliver, a couple of seasons ago, a season and a half ago, he was one of the absolute best midfielders in the AFL. So you can't deny that he's a great talent and probably worth pick 3 in the end. So Nine News' Sam Claude did report that Hawthorn were still interested in him, while his manager Paul Connors pretty much threw that all away a month ago. So I'm not sure what's going on, Kieran. Do you see this move going through at all?
I don't see it going through in the current window, but I think there's definitely where there's smoke, there's fire. I think there's some situations going on at the Bulldogs. And I'm actually not sure if he's worth pick 3. Great player. You obviously get a lot of marketing out of him. He's, extremely available and popular in that regard. There has been some off-field issues as well. It's an interesting one. He's also a bit of a different type of midfielder. He's kind of like more of an athlete than a footballer per se, with his skills and his in and under. So interesting times, I think. It'll be definitely a watch and wait. I can't really see him moving this trade period, but it could be one going forwards. And Geelong, and as an extension, Hawthorn are probably going to be looking to bolster their midfields over the next 2 trade periods. We'll move on to Jade Gresham. This saga's gone on for a long time. Hasn't re-signed at St Kilda. There's reports that he was on $800,000 at St Kilda this season, which I think has possibly complicated the situation, and as to why Jade Gresham hasn't signed for a club yet, because I think that all offers that will be coming for Jade Gresham might be less than that. If the Saints are signing up $800,000, that was probably too much in the first place. It appears as if Essendon's interested club has been rumoured to be Hawthorn and Richmond. How do you see Jade Gresham as a player, and do you think that he'll improve the Bombers' small forward stocks? And I guess he can go to the midfield too.
Yeah, he's obviously a bit of a cherry on top kind of player, and we've probably seen that with the Saints. So I'm not sure he's going to go in and turn around the Essendon's, their list. They've obviously got a lot of ins, and we'll talk about that, a few targets in the trade period. But I think Gresham's best as a small forward. I don't think it's really worth putting him in the midfield. Just get him there, be dangerous, and get under the tools there. So I think that's probably his best role. And I'm curious what kind of compensation you think the Saints would get for Gresham if he did move in free agency.
Well, I think that Gresham's probably, if you're just looking at his pure worth, I think he's probably worth about 500, 550, 600 area, I think, a season, which would put it roughly around probably second round compensation, end of first areas, I think. We don't know how the compensation system is determined. But there is the added element of there's been reports that Dylan Shiel, Essendon would like to get Dylan Shiel off their books. This would facilitate the bringing in of Todd Goldstein and Ben Mackay, and even possibly a move for Oliver. We'll talk about those players in a second. But Dylan Shiel's obviously on a fair bit of money, has been injured. He's 31 years old. It would kind of work like a pick dump. So basically, Essendon would send Shiel and his $900,000 a year approximate contract to St Kilda. They would pay Jade Gresham a little bit more to get St Kilda and end of first round, and then Essendon would probably send back a pick, say about second or third round, like what Gold Coast did with Jack Bowes, but it was obviously a higher pick to Geelong last season, and that pick would probably be used by St Kilda for Liam Henry. So there's a lot of permutations there, but that's what's being reported around the Gresham Shiel deal. Still lots of play out there, and Essendon have a lot of fingers and a lot of pies. They've obviously brought in Ben Mackay, and North Melbourne are getting first round compensation for that, which is I think quite extraordinary. And Todd Goldstein, so they're taking two players from North Melbourne. Where do you see the addition of those two players? And do you think that Mackay, Goldstein, and Gresham can possibly elevate Essendon to be a top four contender?
I'm going to say no, first of all. I don't think that those players in particular are sort of the players that take you to the next level. Ben Mackay is probably the one who I think will be a really big impact there, especially with Bryn and Thatcher probably on the way to Port Adelaide. Todd Goldstein's more of a depth player, probably behind Sam Draper, who's just had hip surgery. So he's going to be a good pickup for them just in terms of depth, and he will play, I think. Andrew Phillips retired as well. So yeah, they're cherry on top kind of players. Ben Mackay, I think, will have a big role to play. And yeah, Gresham would be a good addition as well.
I'm not too sure about Essendon. I'm not too sure if these players are going to take them to the promised land next season. I think that Ben Mackay and Zerk Thatcher almost cancel each other out. I think Ben Mackay is a solid player. I don't think that he's anything special. North Melbourne are getting amazing compensation for him. And you're right about Goldstein. Draper's injured, showing injury problems, has an injury history. So Goldstein could come in valuable. But yeah, interesting times at Essendon, and I'm not too sure if their strategy is the way to go. I guess they've got players like Perkins and Cox and Ben Hobbs, other young talents, Strike Caldwell in their midfield. So maybe they believe that these players are going to be the core, and then they can kind of fill around them. So interesting times. Port Adelaide, one of the other big movers in trade week. They are looking like securing Asaba Radaglia, Brad and Zerk Thatcher, so two key defenders, or Radagalia's played at both ends. And then also it's looking like Jordan Sweet from the Bulldogs is possibly going to be moving, the ruckman who can't get a game behind Tim English. What do you make of Port Adelaide's moves, and what do you think they're going to have to give up for these players?
Well, they absolutely need a couple of defenders, so two good choices for them, and two players that seem to be keen to come to Port Adelaide. Both Radaglia and Zerk Thatcher have requested trades to the club. Probably going to take 2 seconds, I would think, to get those done, and maybe a player. Port currently have picks 38 and 44, which in this draft, with all the compensation, with all the bids, with the father sons, that's going to drop probably into the third round and fairly deep. So probably Xavier Dersma looks like he could be involved in that Essendon deal with Zerk Thatcher. And I don't know where else. Maybe they're going to have to trade a future second. They haven't really used a future first for a few seasons as well. So it's an interesting time for Port, and they seem to be restocking on that 25, 26-year-old player demographic. So, yeah, it's an interesting time for Port Adelaide.
Yeah, I won't mention who my club is, but my club has had some interesting dealings with Essendon's over the years. It seems as if Essendon are demanding a first-round pick for Zerk Thatcher. So it could be a saga. Do you think that he's worth a first round, or being a talented key defender, or maybe back end of first, or what do you think? And do you think also, just an extension, Radigalia, he's shown a little bit in defence for Geelong, but was kind of in and out of the team, injured and stuff. Do you think that he really could be the answer to Port's defensive issues? Do you think that he could, lock down while Leah kind of, is an intercept player, or do you think that it's possibly a risk bringing in these two players?
I think the risk for Radigalia is maybe his kicking. I think as a defensive role, he's going to be really, really good alongside Leah and Zerk Thatcher. That just brings in more height, which Port have really lacked. And just, like you said, being able to free up Leah to do some intercepting. So it's just the kicking probably that's going to be a problem for them between Leah and Radigalia coming out of that back 50. Zerk Thatcher, I don't think he's worth the first round pick. Probably just the value of the key defender in this day and age. It's, that's where that comes from. And obviously Adrian Dodora is very frugal with his trade requests. So it's an interesting one. And I'm curious how Port Adelaide are going to get that done.
And one quick word, Zach Butters coming up out of contract end of next season, I think. Should Port Adelaide be worried at all?
I'm not sure. I think you see the relationship between him and Connor Rosie and his teammates, and that seems to be strong. They don't tend to have a lot of players leave, but he has had some homesickness, so it's an interesting one to watch for sure.
Tom Duday is moving from Adelaide to Brisbane, it appears. What do you think he'll bring to the Brisbane defence? It looks as if he will net around a end of first round compensation to second round for Adelaide, which is interesting for a key player, as he is. But where do you think he fits into Brisbane?
Yeah, he's really highly rated around South Australia and been a really key part of that Crows backline for a while as an interceptor, and sort of fit into that role when Jake Lever left. So he's a really good player. He's had an ACL this season, so it's a bit of an interesting one. I think the Crows weren't exactly willing to give him a 5-year contract as is being proposed by Brisbane. So hopefully he comes back on and he can get himself fit, and he's a really good player. So I think Brisbane will really enjoy having him in their backline.
It makes for some interesting dynamics. You've obviously got Harris Andrews, who's a great interceptor, but the rest of Brisbane's defenders, you've got Starcevich, you've got Darcy Wilmot, Jack Payne, Darcy Gardner, are not great intercept marks. It kind of gives them another, a weapon. And they're also missing a kind of third-size defender, because you've obviously got the two gorillas in Harris Andrews, and then you use Payne or Gardner. But then you're kind of going down to Starcevich and Leicester as your next choice defender. So it really does give them flexibility. And finally, I just want to talk about a contract. Aaron Norton has been given an 8-year extension to his Western Bulldogs deal, which is 9 years from now. It expires in 2032. He's now the longest contracted player in the AFL. What do you make of that deal, and what do you make of these mammoth long deals in general?
There's no doubt, first of all, that Aaron Norton is a player you want to keep on your list for a long time. 8 years, I'm not sure if even the 10 years that supposedly Sydney have offered before that Bulldog signing. So, yeah, he's a really good player, but he's probably lacked in the kicking. He's probably lacked in confidence at times, and he's going to be a great key position player for them. Whether he's worth that kind of money, that kind of length, I guess we'll see. And I guess the other recent was Nick Blakey from Sydney signed a really big deal. So he's the second longest contracted player after Norton. And I do rate Blakey, he's a great player, but it's interesting. Yeah, it's a bit of a trend these days with the young players signing him for big, long deals.
I wonder if Norton's taking a little bit less cash possibly to sign for as long as he is. You're right about his goal kicking. He's 57% over his career. He's 43-33 this year, I think, which is fairly inaccurate. So he's getting shots at goal. So maybe the Bulldogs are backing him to fix his goal kicking up. One thing about Norton is his bravery. He flies back into packs. He's leaping all over the shop. His knee's always strapped. He's hobbling off and coming back on. It's what Kane Corn said, and I kind of agree with you in this regard. Just seems a massive risk for a player of his type. So it'll be interesting to see over the 9 years and as an extension, all of these long deals if they work out. Well, this has been Sporting News' AFL Trade Preview. It's going to be a massive 9 days, and we'll be bringing you all the action on thesportingnews.com.au.